Good evening and
Yes.
a big namaskar to all. Good evening
Good
and
evening.
a namaskar to all viewers into this webinar on monsoon proofing India's growth story. Uh, this is part of the business line uh, knowledge series. And today's topic, as we know, is monsoon proofing India's growth story. Um, I'm sure no one can overemphasize the relevance of the theme, if only because of two known knowns, which is number one, we are negotiating the fag end of what has been an above normal southwest monsoon, and number two, the damage inflicted by the ongoing COVID-19 virus to the economy. Uh, and we don't know where the virus is headed and for how long it would continue to haunt us, which makes us wonder what could have been the status of the economy without the comfort of the good monsoon, marked not just by the adequate quantum of rainfall, but also its excellent temporal and spatial distribution. There's no denying it's been punctuated by floods in some areas of the country and a drought spell in some other, but it's all in the game. Well, with this, let me introduce to you the distinguished members of our panel today. It's as if they need introduction, but I'm venturing to do it for the sake of formality. It's my privilege to welcome Mr. Jatin Singh, founder and managing director of SkyMet Weather Services, India's largest private sector weather forecaster, and Mr. Himanshu Goyal, India business leader for the weather company, which is one of the internationally acclaimed weather forecasting agency. And last but not the least, we have on our panel S. Adi Kesavan, who is Chief General Manager of State Bank of India. Before proceeding to invite my co-panelists, kindly allow me to build some perspective around what promises to be an engaging session on a theme with matchless topical relevance. According to the rating agency Crisil data, India has faced a recession only thrice in the last 69 years. Uh, uh, that's in 1958, 1956, and in 1980. In each of these instances, the recession was brought about by a monsoon shock that hit agriculture. But the role is reversed this time round in 2020, where we have had a very good monsoon, but the villain of the piece happens to be the COVID-19 virus. So the observed asymmetry in the response to monsoon variation suggests that the magnitude of the impact of deficit rainfall on GDP and grain production is larger than the impact of surplus rainfall. Despite a substantial decrease in the contribution of agriculture to GDP over the past 50 years or so, the impact of severe droughts has remained between 2 and 5% of GDP throughout. It would be instructive to recall that India's economy has contracted by a whopping 23.9% in the first quarter of this financial year, in what is the latest sign of the toll taken by the virus. And this is the first time that the economy has seen a contraction in the last 4 decades, and is the first GDP decline since the country began publishing quarterly growth figures in 1996. But in all this, mainly agriculture and allied services has been a lone bright spot growing 3.4% during the quarter. The first quarter estimates, as you know, are based on agricultural production during the Rabi season of 2019-20, which ended in June 2020. So we have witnessed record Kharif sowing amidst a good monsoon already, and it should expectedly create a pent-up demand on the consumption side, even as we enter the festival season and the busy lending season. The GDP growth is expected to bounce back with the opening up of the economy and the gradual subsiding of the pandemic. But we have to wait till November 27 when the next release of the quarterly GDP estimates would be ready. And recently, the RBI has observed in the latest MPC minutes that prospects of agriculture have strengthened on the back of a good spatial and temporal progress of the southwest monsoon. Developments in the farm sector is thought to have had a salutary effect on rural demand as reflected in the fertilizer production and sales of tractors, motorcycles, and fast-moving consumer goods. So a normal monsoon is a good mitigating factor for the tremendous headwinds which India faced, but can it necessarily alter the course of the Indian economy despite its calming effect on food prices? We will discuss this and more in the next 30 to 45 minutes of available time. So I have great pleasure to invite Mr. Adi Kesavan, Chief General Manager, for his introductory remark on the monsoon economy and what the surplus monsoon, which has so far been on view, holds for the economy at large. Mr. Adi Kesavan.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Vincent, and good evening to Mr. Jatin, Mr. Himanshu, and the others who have joined in this very important webinar dealing with the topic of monsoon-proofing India's growth story. When we hear the term monsoon-proofing, generally the concept or the idea that rushes to our mind is how to protect the farmers, or how to protect farm income from the vagaries of the monsoon, how to protect the output from the farms from the impact that the monsoon has in general. Because traditionally we have been brought up on the theory that Indian agriculture continues to be a gamble on the monsoons. But one striking difference in contemporary discussions is the fact that the risk of the effect of the monsoons on agriculture is more on the upside than on the downside in recent years, by which what I mean is output has not been much of an issue, but what has been critically important and very significant from the farmer's point of view is that the fair and remunerative prices which the output should fetch, whether that is available, whether the farmers get enough for their labor, whether the income that accrues on account of the output covers the cost of labor, covers the cost of the effort that has been put in. And this, I think, is more important today than in the past, which leads us to the question that the problem of agriculture today, even in this COVID season, will be more to do with the problem of plenty than with the problem of shortages which we used to deal in the past. And the traditional instruments of dealing with the problems in the field of agriculture may again prove to be inadequate given the fact that even as we face steep dips in other segments of the economy, agriculture continues to be, fortunately and very happily for us, very resilient and continues to display growth rates which are inconsistent or which are out of tune with the other segments of the economy. That is by way of preface. Now, if I were to look at broadly 5 or 6 areas which I believe are the things that should be addressed when we want to discuss the issue of monsoon proofing the Indian growth story. Number one is what I believe, the declining trend of public investment in agri infrastructure, by which what I mean is, say up until the 1990s and the end of the last century, we have had consistently high investments from the public sector in agri infrastructure per se, in large irrigation dams, in large irrigation projects, starting with some of the very famous names like the Nagarjuna Sagar Dam, the Batra Nangal Dam, the Rajasthan Canal, so on and so forth, coming up to the Sardar Sarovar Narmada project, which happened, the completion happened towards the end of the last century. But for the last 20-25 years, we have not had much of very large investments in agri infrastructure projects coming from the public sector. This is one issue. The second issue is related to the problem of plenty, which I mentioned, is that how do we ensure that when the output is good, when the going is good, and there is output coming from this sector, the farmers produce record harvest after harvest, fair and remunerative prices are given to the farmers so that they don't suffer on account of the increase in the yield. Sometimes when the prices dip, the more they produce, the more the losses could be on account of the production from the fields. So how do we prevent this from playing itself out to the disadvantage of the farmers is the second issue that I think we need to discuss and come up with solutions for. The third is, most importantly, how do we get farmers as part of the discourse? Even in this conversation or in other conversations, one thing which has struck me as very distinct is that the farmer doesn't become part of the discourse. The farmer, by which what I mean is the person tilling the field, his voice, where do we accommodate his voice? How do we give a space for his voice is something which is very important. And the fourth and fifth things are related to consultations on any policy with regard to agriculture, which is reflected in the very recent controversy over the three major reforms that have been introduced were introduced by way of ordinances and now have come to be passed by way of bills. That there is probably, it reflects probably the need for some more consultation, the need for some more involvement of the stakeholders in building up consensus in changes which we want to introduce in the agri sphere. Can we have an interstate council like the GST Council, wherein the voices of the states are heard and the articulations of the states are accommodated? And also the fact of the transfer from the producer to the consumer, which has been happening over the years, largely in the attempt to contain inflation. Are we punishing the producer and trying to facilitate prices in favor of the consumer? And if we are doing that, which is par for the course as far as macroeconomic management is concerned, how do we compensate the producer for the transfer of pricing which happens from the producer to the consumer, about which there have been studies indicating transfers to the tune of about 3 lakh crores, 4 lakh crores, which have happened from the producer to the consumer? And in that context, and also in the context of the declining trend of public investment in agriculture, is it time to think of a cess on income tax for agri infrastructure, like the cess on education, which we are having on the income tax, so that we have more money to spend on agri infra, and there is a transfer back from the consumer to the producer, which will take place through this taxation mechanism. Is that an idea whose time has come? This is an important issue which should be discussed in the context of monsoon-proofing India's growth story. And by way of preliminary observations, let me also bring in the Manrega and the outlay for Manrega, and how can we weave in the outlay for Manrega as a facilitator for capacity building in the agri infrastructure space. Last year, at the start of the financial year, when the budget was presented, the outlay for Manrega was 61,500 crore. And as part of the COVID Atma Nirbhar package, the outlay has been increased by another 40,000 crore. So roughly about 1 lakh crore is available for rural employment guarantee work related things. Is there a way of capturing at least 50% of this outlay for capacity building, for facilitating agri infrastructure, and for facilitating the monsoon proofing of the Indian growth story that we are concerned with? These, I think, are some of the preliminary observations from my side, which are relevant and very contextual and important when we discuss this subject of monsoon proofing India's growth story. I remain very positive and optimistic about the sector per se, because a lot of the developments which have happened in the recent past, a lot of voices which are coming from the stakeholders point to the need for building a consensus, point to the fact that there is increasing emphasis on an area which is seen to be critical for sustaining the momentum of the Indian growth story. And therefore, there is optimism, there is hope that the discussions that we continue to have, and a part of which is this webinar, will add to the overall efforts that are being made to monsoon proof, to risk mitigate the growth story, especially from the agricultural perspective and from a rural infrastructure background. This I thought I could articulate by way of initial submissions in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adhikesavan, for that very eloquent enunciation of what can actually the country can do in terms of increasing the agricultural infrastructure investment for agricultural investment and public investment in agriculture, and which are very relevant points which the government can actually think of doing on the back of a good monsoon, because otherwise we have a very tepid situation with the COVID virus in action. So these are we have made your case brilliantly, Mr. Adhikesavan. Thank you so much. And Mr. Adhikesavan, do you monsoon that we have had so far can give us some helpful prompt in terms of designing a future policy regime in the lines of what you have already said? Does the good monsoon give us that comfort where we can think of at least getting with some moves along these lines? Do we have the time yet to think along these lines?
Yeah, Absolutely. If you would allow me just 2 minutes, because I am conscious of the fact that the other panelists may also want to make preliminary observations. Before, in
Okay.
preparation for this discussion, I
Yeah.
was speaking to farmers,
Yeah.
two of them in Maharashtra and two of them in Gujarat, who are beneficiaries of large irrigation projects. And they are unequivocally of the view that the large projects of which they are beneficiaries have
Hello.
mitigated. Hello, can you hear me? Am I audible, please? Am I audible, please?
Yes, sir, you are.
Yeah. So when I was talking to farmers who are beneficiaries of large irrigation projects, they are unequivocally of the view that these projects have made it possible for them to have crops during the rabi season as well, which was not the case prior to the coming into being of these large irrigation projects. So I would again submit that when we speak of a good monsoon, how do we derive the benefit of a good monsoon so that it sustains the irrigation facilities, the water availability prospects for crop cultivation throughout the year, during the rabi season as well, during the winter season as well. In large tracts of India, still there is no provision for ensuring the the water supply, water availability throughout the year, so that it can facilitate around the year crop cultivation, which is happening in the areas where large irrigation projects have come up. And the only thing to be guarded against when we speak about large irrigation projects is that we should avoid leakages, we should avoid corruption, we should avoid cost increases on account of delays in the implementation of these projects. If we can have an efficient national level body, maybe on the lines of the National Highways Authority of India, National Agricultural Infrastructure Authority, or some such structure, that will pave the way for identifying weaknesses in the availability of agri infrastructure, which will sustain the effect of a good monsoon throughout the year for farmers in ensuring water availability. And that I would submit is the lesson that we should draw from a good monsoon, that we should not waste a good monsoon, and that we should see to it that the result of a good monsoon remains available for a farmer throughout the year instead of being restricted to the monsoon season per se. Thank you. Yes, Vincent, I finished my say, and I thought that if there is any other thing I could subsequently come in and contribute, uh, I can see Mr. Himanshu.
The
And
connectivity here.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Singh. Good evening, Mr. Jitin Singh. Hello.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Yeah. You've been watching the monsoon very closely from June this year.
Yes,
The good run so far, despite the
yes,
actually ended up with a deficit, and of course we in June, but the entire surplus was forfeited. But August helped us. We are still in a surplus situation with August. So how do you see the monsoon? The September, of course, we as of today. How do you have more rain to come
sir,
during?
I'm losing you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
intermittent. I think I know what you're asking, that how do I see the monsoon
sorry.
progress further?
So, is it okay right now?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, hello.
Go ahead, Vincent.
Yes.
It's fine.
Yes.
Where we are headed with the rest of the monsoon for this year, and just another 12 days to go, have more rain coming to 7 as we approach the end of the season?
Yes, I mean, it's fairly clear. You're 107 right now, and
Hello?
there is another low building up, which is remnant of another cyclone that is coming. So there's one last big shower that is left that is going to come. And it's very clearly going to be what we kind of anticipated, somewhere between above normal and excess monsoon year this year.
Yeah.
That is a good thing. My fear is that, if you have a fortnight in the first fortnight of October that is also active, and that happens from time to time, then you have another problem that is of crop damage at the time of, say, post-harvest losses. We really, just because we've had a good monsoon doesn't mean that it's over. The cutting is going to start. Parts of soybean and pulses are already damaged. So on the outside, until I would say we need to see through at least the first fortnight of October, then to really conclude that this was a good monsoon, in the sense that the productivity was healthy, or there were no large concentrated patches of destruction. There are parts of MP, for instance, that are not doing too well when it comes to the soybean crop. Also, there's been a significant amount of damage because of repeated flooding in Gujarat this year. So we have to wait. We have to wait it out before the clear picture of the productivity and the quality of that productivity is going to start showing up.
So we have this, I think, is the last season, the current. Are we expecting another low?
Sir, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There is a low, sir, that is appearing. It's a remnant of another cyclone that is coming from the Bay of Bengal,
Okay.
and it's going to spin into a low, and it's going to, so there will be a last flush before the 30th of September as we close this monsoon. So it's not going to peter out.
Okay. Right. And can you hazard a guess on what the winter monsoon would be like? I mean, we have a northeast monsoon for the south of India, and also the winter rains, which are very crucial for the rabi crop in the north and northwest of India. So, is there have you been able to figure out what could be the likely scenario going out into October and November, and also into December?
Sir, in terms of the western disturbance in North India rainfall, it does not have a signal like the monsoon has.
Right.
So any guess is a guess, is a statistical flip of a coin. Is it going to be early? Because is the La Nina, will there be a cooling? Will it be have extended western disturbance? There is no statistical correlation. You've got to anticipate it. The good part is that you're going either way, going into Rabi, there will be lots of water. The soil moisture is rich. Uh, your reservoirs are actually full. Going into summer 2021,
Right.
you're not looking at a hydrological distress situation on an average grid basis across the country. In terms of first, as I said, you could have an extended monsoon at least into the first fortnight of October. About the northeast monsoon, there is no clear kind of signal, but it is known that in an El Nino year, the northeast monsoon that hits Tamil Nadu and Kerala is about 1.5x of the. This is the flip side of it. So in a northeast monsoon, in a La Nina-ish year that this one is evolving into, there could be statistically. I don't think there's a dynamic we've actually coming to that conclusion. Actually, something that is weakish, but those correlations are lesser than that of the proper southwest monsoon.
Right. But are we more or less settled on the fact that there's a La Nina playing out already?
It's an evolving La Nina. The temperatures have been going down. The definition of what a La Nina is also very subjective. Some people look for 3/4 of plus 0.5, just like the reverse of that is the El Nino. But if you've had a longish regime of the Pacific actually cooling, I actually haven't seen the numbers that came on last week, but generally the trend throughout the monsoon has that it is cooling, and that's why you've got such a good monsoon, and that was anticipated actually in the beginning of the monsoon. So the La Nina impact, see, one of the things is subjective. That do I have to have a full-fledged La Nina to have a great monsoon? Certainly not. You need an evolving La Nina. Just like for a drought, you need an evolving El Nino. You don't need a textbook El Nino to kind of compromise your monsoon. So in terms of what a probable impact that La Nina could have, it's already had it. You've had a good this monsoon is actually better than last year's monsoon because there was massive variability until July 2019. Monsoon was running at a minus 20, and from that it went to 110. We haven't had that issue. It's been, with the exception of July, which was minus 10. It kind of has been raining.
Okay. And what is your take on the situation in our backyard where the Indian Ocean is shaping up to be on the lower side of the warming, the lower side of the median, where we can possibly expect some cooling and a negative Indian Ocean dipole?
Sir, the Indian Ocean dipole has kind of shown its colors only twice very clearly, like in terms of a signal that the ENSO has. One was 1990, I think 7, when you
Right.
had a very strong El Nino, but you had a decent monsoon because the IOD was very positive. And
Yes.
2020, 2019, which was a historic IOD positive, it has never been that warm.
Yes.
Otherwise, if you try to fit the IOD into any kind of dynamical calculation, it is not very reliable. For instance, I'll tell you, if you go back 4 months, there was this real concern that the IOD is going to cool
Right.
significantly. If you look at the models going back 4 months, I can pull it out, and these are the NSEM models, that the IOD was going to cool, and that could have some impact on the monsoon. The key thing is that it did not cool at the rate that it was supposed to. Models are also very fickle. They go this way and that. So
Yes.
I am of the school of thought that I don't think we understand. IOD definitely has a very strong signal. We have lived through what happened last year. Okay,
Right.
I
Yes.
don't think we understand the IOD that we could put it into a dynamical calculation to make some kind of prognosis.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jatin, for your initial remarks. And I will turn to Mr. Himanshu Goyal, India business leader of the weather company. Mr. Goyal, my question to you would be basically on the technology part of how we can hope to monsoon-proof the growth story in India. It basically it has to do with the play of digital technology at the bottom of the pyramid, where we can reach out to the farmers and other stakeholders with the kind of forecasts which they need. It can be early warning. It can be an update of current or ongoing weather phenomena, just like the monsoon, into the mid and progressively into the later stages. So it basically periodically updating with them. Updating them with what's happening around them and what can be expected going forward. So how do you see us being able to be on the same page as the farmers on the ground when it comes to the play out of the weather, and how we can keep them informed on what could happen, going forward?
Sure. Thank you, Vincent, for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sure, I can.
Good evening to you, and good evening to Mr. Adiv Keswan and Jatin. Pleasure to be on a panel with both of you luminaries. So I think I love the discussion, the initial points Mr. Adikeshwan said, and I think with his experience and his far sight on agriculture, how he has seen and what he plans to see as he articulated. And I think Jatin gave a great idea of how statistically he has looked at monsoon. So let me just blend the two and talk to you about how we at IBM see the going forward route of agriculture in India and dependency or non-dependency on monsoon. So I think the good news for all of us is that we have a lot of forecasting companies now in the business of doing a forecast. So we have multiple options for farmers to look at a consolidated, if I were to use a word, analysis of a couple of providers to figure out where the whole monsoon cycle is going, which is a great news from the fact that there's so much of digitization, as we saw in payments, we saw in e-commerce, we saw in banking, and now we are probably seeing in agriculture. Now, agriculture is not a simple problem to solve. I mean, we all are proud of the green revolution, which a lot of luminaries brought to India. We are very well sufficient in a lot of foodstuffs, which is a great pride. But as Mr. Adi Keswan pointed out, we have a problem of surplus with good monsoon. So I think if you look at monsoon prediction, I think that bit is sorted now. And of course, we will have varieties of putting the statistical models. Everyone is bringing the best of the technology. We launched something called as IBM Global Atmospheric Forecasting System, which is probably the world's largest investment ever made on monsoon, on weather forecast globally. So with that, now coming into India, we pretty much did predict 105% monsoon. It's going up and down a bit, but until September, it gets to that level. Now, how does that take us to the next level of what are the vagaries of the farmer? Now, I have put up this chart, mentioned with your permission. What we are going after is really, there are two challenges for a farmer. There are uncontrollable variables on the farm, there are controllable variables on the farm. Now, the controllable variables definitely are well planned for. There's a good knowledge to the farmer about what's really actions they have to do on the farmland. But the worry is always the uncontrollable variables, that how many growing degree days I will have, how much of sunshine will I have, how much precipitation which I will have, what will be the volume and what day, what timelines of monsoon, for example, if you look at Kharif per se, or how and what will happen to Rabi in future. Then the soil moisture. Now, Jatin brought out a point about soil moisture being good for Rabi. Great news. Now, how do we really plan for it versus the availability of irrigation and the cost associated? So I think given the capability of artificial intelligence today and a lot of data, we at IBM are really focusing on bringing these facts of the data we can bring on the farm to the farmer. Now, if all these data points are well articulated, there are a lot of modeling which could be done to put together a sense of what will happen in next 3 to 6 months on the farm. And with that, what the farmer can get advice on. Should he grow a certain crop? Should he not grow a certain crop? And again, when we got to a price point, which was brought earlier in the discussion, that how do we make a farmer profitable? That's where the AI bit comes in to say, look, I understand statistically and the forecast, here would be the rains, this is what would be the growing degree days, this would be the condition of the soil. Statistically, soybean has been a crop which has had so much of variation. Now, should people in Mansoor, for example, grow soybean or should grow something on horticulture or maybe mushrooms for need? So those are the bits which we are aiming to solve, and we very proudly work with a sample project with Karnataka government to figure out, what happens to crops like, maize as well as tomato, and how do we look at the price, arrival price of those yield, which would be predicted in a certain season, to look at what would be a good decision for a farmer to get, whether he should grow those crops or he should grow some other crops. So I think, the good news is there's a lot of interest in agtech now. There's a lot of people bringing in new technology, new concepts. A lot of AI and ML models are being tried out. And getting to the far end of the farmer, I think the empowerment of FPOs with these digital technologies is where we are seeing value. So all this while we were working with the business to business connects, big companies who are in agro input and output. But now we are seeing a good trend of the FPOs also coming to the party and trying to take this technology inputs back to the farmer. So I think that's the harbinger of, getting the farmer's mind also onto this technology as an input, again, on a statistical basis to look at how we can make everything very productive. So I think I'm really positive about the fact that we are able to bring a good weather forecast, which a lot of others are doing great job. I appreciate. And we are blending that data with other data sets to bring in more decision capability in the ecosystem. So my take is I see a positive opportunity all through.
Okay, thank you, Himanshu. I just wanted to pose you another very interesting query, which is about the indigenous knowledge on weather. How and whether the indigenous knowledge can be integrated into the latest forecasting systems involving AI and ML, because the farmers in the farming heartland of the country are just not able to embrace the technology, at least for digital technology. So can we possibly make them, be more interested by having their input, uh, especially the indigenous knowledge that they have built over generations, and can they be integrated into the system so that they also, as Mr. Adhikeshwan mentioned, they also get to know of a certain level of participation in the planning and designing of things. So, does it appear to you as a possibility at all?
Yes. So I can't share the name of a company, but we're working with a very prestigious company in India with something what we have defined as cohort uh, practices. The cohort really means is that typically when you go to a village, you would see there would be a few top of the line farmers using modern techniques, bringing great productivity. Then you'll have people following them. Now, and that is a great system which has worked for centuries. So what we did is we've tried to put together the knowledge of that 70% farmers who are building some practices to bring in good output. And we call that cohort analysis to put that whole thing together to see that if those practices are followed, can we turn around the rest 30% of the producers who might be marginal, who would be mid-size, etc. So very right. I mean, AI takes in, I mean, artificial intelligence has to be bought with real intelligence. So what we definitely need is a lot of this real intelligence to then artificially add it and then put together the cohort analysis of what could be the really best practices going forward. So definitely that's in the works at the moment, as I can tell you.
Thank you. Uh, Coming back to Mr. Adhikeshwan, what do you make of um, the um, the weather forecasting technology, as we know, and its progress and its induction of new technological avenues like artificial intelligence, deep learning, and machine learning? Do you think it can help reach out to the farmers? You've been interacting with farmers, and what is their level of acceptance to something like technology? Do they see technology playing a part in their lives when it comes to farming and other things? Are they ready yet to embrace technology at the ground level? Sorry, I can't.
I
I'm
think
sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah. I think I have to unmute. Yeah.
Okay.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Yeah. So very relevant question, and I am deeply enriched by the comments of my friends, Mr. Jatin and Mr. Himanshu. So as far as technology adoption is concerned, we have to go back to the question of the involvement of the farmers at the initial stage itself when we are trying to introduce technology, so that they are onboarded from the initial stage itself. And if that were to happen, whether it is in the nature of an experiment with which State Bank of India and SkyMet weather company has been trying out in large areas of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, or whether there are other areas where the IBM weather company is trying to introduce new models of cultivation, as Mr. Himanshu mentioned, in Karnataka. I think the way to look at technology for agriculture is to also integrate farmers at the initial stage itself, so that they are onboarded and they are involved and they realize the benefits that accrue out of technology. And then we also learn from them about what kind of use this technology can be put to from their standpoint. And if that is done, I am a great votary and a believer in technology. It will only help us in addressing the problems of a large, majority of our farmers who are small and marginal farmers. 86, 87% have land holdings below the threshold of 2 hectares. So we can address the largeness of numbers only through technology. Number two, they will definitely benefit on account of the introduction of technology for weather forecasting, for choosing the kind of crop, which Mr. Himanshu mentioned, which is important, like in Mansoor, whether you can try, I think if I heard him right, mentioned whether mushroom can be tried out in that area, which is definitely could be a game-changing kind of thinking. But how do we get the farmers on board will be a challenge which we have to address. But all these things, at the end of the day, being a banker, Mr. Vincent, I would say that all the things that we are discussing would boil down to finances, would boil down to additional outlays for agriculture, additional money to be spent from the public exchequer. And if that money is going to be scarce, as we all know, the government also doesn't have unlimited resources. Therefore, it is time that we think increasingly of having some kind of cess similar to the cess on education and health, which we have on the income tax, similar to the surcharge which we are levying. Can we think of levying a portion of a surcharge or a cess which will be exclusively and totally used for agri infrastructure, for technology development in agriculture without leakages? Then all the things which we are discussing is possible to be done, and then it will go to the benefit of the farmers. This is the submission that I want to make.
Mr. Jatin Singh, SkyMet go for a cast for the monsoon this year. We're researching
Yes.
on out at the global level.
Sir, I can't hear you.
Sorry?
I can't hear you, sir. It's going in and out.
I'm sorry.
Can you come again, please?
Yeah. In fact, you had skipped the long-range forecast for the monsoon this year.
Yes.
And you said you will go back to getting to know what exactly is happening on a global scale. You know, the teleconnections with the monsoon, and you will revise your tools and maybe resume the long-range forecast from next year. So, what have you learned during this, last so many months, as to the influence of both the ENSO and the IOD on the Indian monsoon? Have we learned anything new?
So when we started out in 2012, I don't know if you were aware, this gentleman who is the father of modern Indian monsoon, D.R. Sikka. And and the fact is that since 1984, since Cray XMP 14 came to this country, we've been struck. If you remember, before 2012, the argument were always these 6 parameter, 7 parameter
Yeah.
IMD forecast model, correct?
Yeah.
And we would have North Atlantic oscillation and all of that. And if you look at all the IMD monsoons, say before 2012, 13, they were all around 98, 99, 98, 99 plus minus 5.
Right.
So I mean, just look at it. I don't think the IMD ever, like for example, that 2015 monsoon was a very, very daring monsoon in the traditions of the IMD, where we clearly said that this is not going to work out.
Yeah.
So what he taught us, and basically, if the audience, do you have some 5-7 minutes? Let me give some background. Can I tell
Sure.
everybody an anecdote? So when there used to be drought, so there is, unfortunately, we live at a time where everything is driven by what happened, like what is happening. I think we talked about monsoon proofing the economy. Up until 2018, the argument around monsoon was always about drought. 2 years ago, and I'll tell you why. Between the year 1900 and the year 2000, there was on an average one drought per decade. Between 2000 and 2020, there actually have been 5 droughts and 3 below year monsoons. One of the impacts of climate change, which came out 30 years ago, was that initially, as the earth gets warmer, the number of frequency of droughts will increase. And between 2020 and 2030, and these are off by a couple of years here and there, these are long range climate models, because the hydrological cycle will become more intense because the earth will be warmer. The number of the excess rain events are actually going to start, and that is what the transition was going to be.
Right.
So that was one part of the narrative. The second was that so we've all heard of Gilbert Walker. We all, the man who came, who was brought in by the British in the 1920s. And what he did was he got human computers from all over the world to correlate data. At that point of time, to which I would say even now, long range dynamics is not very well understood. And he came up with this high pressure, low pressure kind of dichotomy between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, which was not really understood well. And when you put it into model, it would fail. So if you remember before 2012, people would say that if it has snowed a lot in North India, the monsoon will fail because the low will not be strong enough to pull in the winds. But the fact was that was because of our limited synoptic understanding up until that time. Then I'm forgetting, but there was a Swedish gentleman who said that what Gilbert Walker had done actually correlates very well with the phenomena of the El Nino. Then D.R. Sikka in 1980, and I've actually made a documentary of this, it's there on YouTube, came up with this correlation that if you do a normal spread historically of the ENSOs and the monsoons, it's relatively easy to pick out a drought. Now, what does that mean? Even today, even though I've been doing this since 2012, so I have about 8 years of data, you will see that in an El Nino year, and I'll come to what an El Nino year actually means, there's a 0% chance of excess. There is an 80% chance of below normal, and there is a 60% chance of drought. So if you are in April and the ENSO models are showing a pretty good signal of an El Nino, which was there in 2018, which was there in 2019 also, which was there in 2017, which was there in 2014, 4 and 9. All those years, with the exception of 19. See, this is where those errors come in, are below normals or droughts. Whenever you've had a La Nina, and like this year, it is either above normal or excess, with the exception of 2016, which was supposed to be La Nina year, and in the initial forecast, if people remember, was about 108, it ended up at a -3. And when you look at all the NCEP models, as much as computing you will throw into it, you realize that over a long, say, multi-decadal or tri-decadal cycle, plotting the ENSO and the reliability of the ENSO forecast is better than a dynamical 3-month, 4-month, 6-month model. Those models, they compute, but I'm not sure, if people are able to, if those models stand as good as the statistical one. That means that there is a dynamical relationship, obviously, but how these two lines meet, I don't think we have enough atmospheric evidence to connect that. So you take what is called a statistical bet, which is reinforced by some kind of, so your April outputs for monsoon are pretty good. You know, you cannot look beyond June. That is the problem. Therefore, so if for example, and you can test me out on this, if the ENSO is warming up and there's a very clear signal, not volatility, you realize that June will definitely fail, and then the volatilities are going to come in July, August, and September. So what we learned, why we stopped, was because in 2018, our last forecast was for 91. We ended up at a 91. I think 2018 is actually a drought. If you look at the numbers, okay, it was a 90. In 2019, all the signals were there, but we did not take into consideration IOD. Because again, if I had taken into consideration an IOD this year, learning from last year, we would have moderated the forecast. So that's why I wanted to test it out. And the fact is that the ENSO is the preponderant signal. The IOD ENSO correlation is not very well understood. So when you're giving a forecast, you might edge it by actually ignoring the IOD signal until the IOD signal is very strong. And if you look at the forecast of the IOD, they are less reliable than the forecast of the ENSO. So, so that is where we are. So in 2021, if we give a forecast, it will again be ENSO based, looking at if there is a dynamical kind of reinforcement of what the statistical picture is. Also, see, if you figure out, you will say, oh, this year is not an El Nino year and there's a drought, then you have to see the weekly volatilities of the ENSO, and you'll realize that if there's a tendency of the temperatures to go up and down, but mostly on the up, say it starts touching 0.5, it need not cross the threshold of 0.5 consistently. It has an El Nino-like effect, and it is those years that on a pure statistical calculation that somebody who's not seen it dynamically for years will say, oh, this is not an El Nino year and there is a drought, therefore this correlation does not exist. I learned this the hard way when I looked at those data sets on a weekly basis. So
Jatin, to the we have got the members of the panel. Let me first question to there's a question from Mr. Jitendra. Know what are small holders information in terms of the weather.
Monsoon, I'm losing you.
Hello.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that question? Because we have not heard it properly, please.
In reaching out to small holders, landholders, with the important weather information. That's what Mr.
Himanshu, you want to take that? Then I'll take it after you guys do that a lot.
So I think the constraints are not many today. Normally company like us prefer a B2B engagement, which then gets to the B2F, the business to the farmers, either the agtech platform players or the professional, companies who are involved in agriculture. But we've seen a lot of, farmers familiar with using a modern phone are able to access data. In fact, just to mention, I met a farmer from Mandi area who's growing, badam, almonds of very rich quality, and they're using their iPhone to get the data, which has a weather app in it. So, I think now there's no limitation, especially for even the simple phones also have this data. So I don't think there's much limitation, but yeah, we still can improve on it. That's work in progress for a lot of us. Over to you, Jatin.
Um, you see, IBM has a monopoly on all the apps on the mobile phones. So there is, as the internet and as these things have grown, AccuWeather and IBM has actually done a great job because they've been able to reach to the people that had to be reached to on the phone, and that's because these two companies kind of dominate the mobile market. So kind of, and they are the only two companies that do that. Obviously, that said, the smallholder farmer today, even on a feature phone, can access pretty decent quality weather information. But as we do those kind of things. We work with B2B business. We also have an app. But nonetheless, and also the quality of the information that was available, especially on the near real time, has improved because there's radars, there's lightning. You can download their apps, you can download my app. It'll give you a 35 for 45 minute 30 minute 45 minutes warning of a thunderstorm. I'll tell you the next step where the problem is.
Hello, Mr.
The problem is with the problem that needs to.
Hello, can I intervene, Mr. Jatin?
Sorry.
Because I think we are running out of time.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
I'm sorry if there are a few questions more, but for shortage of time, we're not able to take all of them here. And maybe next time, and big sorry to the viewers who have sent those questions and not being able to access the panelists. I'm so sorry. And we have been, facing a lot of bandwidth issues also today during the course of this webinar. And I am afraid we're not being able to reach out to in a fashion we would have liked. I'm saying sorry to the viewers, and let's wind up this session for now. Maybe we can catch up later. And thank you all panelists, my esteemed panelists, for today's interaction. Maybe we can meet on a sooner date. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Salute.